18. The days and nights grew steadily colder with the advancing season. Scarlet and yellow leaves fell, leaving bare branches outlined against the green of firs and pines or against the sky, blue most of the time, occasionally gray with clouds. My chrysanthemums, blackened by frost, had to be cleared away. Light snows fell, melted quickly, and were gone. The boys filled my woodshed to bursting with split oak and fir. All day a fire crackled and glowed in the big old stove that long ago had been the pride of some woman's heart. I like to imagine that it came around the horn in one of those old sealing vessels, then was brought up to the country on muleback over the faintest of trails or no trail at all. A fine, dignified stove for all its molded curlicues, and it kept Vicky and me warm and snug. By the last of November, most of the wildflower seed pods had burst, their contents sifting down through the loose carpet of dry pine needles and drifting brown leaves out of reach of my friends, the birds. How or where they found food I did not know, but many remained, though they most often have been hungry. They must often have been hungry. Though they must often have been hungry. Anyways, I tied scraps of fat to the leafless branches of the little peach and apricot trees and scattered crumbs on the bare ground in my yard. Dozens of little birds, some brightly colored, some a modest gray, came to feast on this bounty. They gave me hours of entertainment as I watched their dartings and flittings from my kitchen window. Then there were the timid quail that used their wings only when startled. They came walking daintily from the low bushes, chirping their low musical call. For these trim, lovely birds I kept something special, a bag of crushed barley. This they loved, filling their crops eagerly with the rich grain. The boys gathered the last of the vegetables in the bent pine garden and stored them in the tool house, carefully protected by old newspapers and gunny sacks so they wouldn't freeze. A great deal of covering wasn't required. Our weather along the Klamath was never severe. Dear Sir and Up, in their usual generous fashion, told me that I was to share in this harvest, when and however much I wished. There was, in fact, much more than we could possibly use. But if I knew those boys, they'd give much of it away before the products of next spring garden would be ready to eat. Days slipped by until one morning the calendar announced that the 20th of December had come. It was almost Christmas. I looked out my kitchen window and thought I had never seen a more beautiful day, all blue and gold and green. Weeks before, I had refused to leave my little cabin to spend a proper Christmas out in the world with my family, where beautiful trees were turned into a framework to hold blazing lights and glittering gimcracks. Very pretty they were, too, but I preferred to stay where the trees would keep on growing after Christmas, just as they had done before. Some called me stubborn. Others used the words slightly unbalanced. Anyone who wanted to stay away from the conventional joys of Christmas, well, it just wasn't natural. But I felt very well satisfied as I stood looking out that window. Across the river, mighty evergreens clothed the mountain slopes that lifted their heights to meet the sky. What could be more satisfying except for me to be outside, a part of this wonder world? I decided I would go to Bent Pine to get a head of cabbage and a half dozen eggs, even though I knew the boys were not there. They had gone to Happy Camp for a supply of staple groceries for themselves and to fill my order for, among other things, beef, suet, raisins, spices, and so on for the mince pie I was going to make for our Christmas dinner. I pulled on my heavy tweed coat, and there was Vicky fanning my legs with her plumy tail, making whimpering sounds of joy. With my little Ivor Johnson pistol tucked in my canvas vegetable sack, Vicky and I set out for the Bent Pine claim. As we went down the short stretch of private road leading to the boys' cabin, I stopped to peer into the shadowy tool house. I had been there several times, even made one brief effort at straightening it up, but had desisted before making any appreciable impression on its shocking disorder. But now was my chance. Dear Sir and Up wouldn't be back before dark. This was going to be a joy, and Dear Sir would be so grateful. The first task was to get what looked like a small barbecue grill out of the way. It wasn't too heavy, but offered considerable resistance as it stood on four spraddled iron legs. After much pulling and hauling, I managed to shove it against the rear wall, thereby covering myself with charcoal dust. What to do next was a problem, but a nail keg standing near the workbench gave me an idea. I gathered up nails of every kind, straight, bent, and rusted, large and small, and dropped them into the keg. At one end of the bench I found a half dozen or so little boxes labeled Hungarian nails. What in the world, I wondered, would anyone want of Hungarian nails? They, too, went into the keg. By this time it was level full. Then I wrestled the empty cartons around, piled them in neat stacks, sorted out the contents of other cartons, put old boots in one pile, various items of clothing in another, all of which seemed past any hope of usefulness. Stuffing these into the boxes, I shoved the boxes far back under the workbench. Hours went by, and I seemed to be making some progress, but my arms began to ache and my knees to wobble from standing so long. I threw an old blanket over the nail keg and sat down on it. With great satisfaction, I thought of telling dear sir that my cleaning up of the tool house would be my Christmas gift to him, and a very practical sort that would be sure to please him. On Sunday, when the boys did not go to the mine, they never found time for a cleaning job like this. They always had a big washing to do, swamping out the cabin, cleaning the nanny's barn on the hill across the road, filling the mangers with hay. Well, anyway, they called it their rest day. I knew I mustn't sit too long, patting myself on the back, so I went to the bench again, my back to the wide open door. When I started the job, the day had been all before me, and I didn't realize it was all behind me until a crisp little breeze lifted my skirt and sent a chill up my tired legs. I dropped a handful of small hammers and looked out to see a veil of falling snow. As I looked, it changed to a downfall of feathers from a giant feather bed. The strange gloom that had settled over the outside world frightened me. I ran for the cabin, Vicky at my heels. We were almost there when I saw that my cougar skin was gone from the wall. That meant it must be thoroughly dry. Then why hadn't Up and Up given it to me? It hurt me that he hadn't. Because of sheer carelessness, I was sure, given me my rug. I really needed it, now that the weather had come. Should I speak to him again about it? Jog his memory? No, I would not. He could just take it his own good time. Inside, the cabin air was stale, smelling of old tobacco smoke, and sundry wet garments hung along the wall to dry. I dropped into a chair and comforted myself with the thought that the boys would be showing up before long and take me and my groceries down to my cabin. Meantime, I would start a fire in the rusty stove, get the chill out of my bones, and have the cabin warm for them when they came. Dear Sir's kindling box was full of thinly split sticks, each seemingly exactly like every other stick and neatly arranged. I hated to disturb this mathematical accuracy, but a fire must be built, and kindling is nothing to get sentimental about. I chose an old newspaper, carefully selected as to date so I would not burn a recent one, took a handful of the kindling, and a few sticks of wood from a pile as neatly arranged as the kindling. I put these in the firebox of the stove, then looked about for a match. I knew that matches were absolutely necessary to two pipe-smoking men, but for the life of me, I couldn't see a match anywhere. Shaking with cold, I started a determined inch-by-inch search for matches. After running my fingers over sundry shelves, books, tobacco cans, and other oddments, I gave up. No matches. Maybe the boys had used all they had and planned to get more in Happy Camp, so I was without a fire and couldn't even light the lamp. Vicky, the mind reader, was trembling at my side, and I began to tremble myself, thinking what might be ahead of me. A night of freezing cold and inky darkness, if the boys didn't show up. It was black night outside by this time, and I knew it would be folly for me to try to make my way back to my cabin. Hunger was gnawing at my vitals, whatever they are. A breakfast of toast and coffee isn't very sustaining, and I had put in several hours of unremitting toil in that tool house. Earlier, I had taken note of some cold beans in a kettle on the stove with an iron spoon sticking out of them. So, a cold bean supper it would be. How an empty stomach can make a pig of a usually fastidious woman is no longer a marvel to me. I didn't stop eating until the spoon hit the bottom of the kettle. Time passed. I gave up expecting Dear Sir and Up that night and began worrying about why they hadn't come home. Maybe something had happened to them on the mountain road that twisted its precarious length between Happy Camp and the Bent Pine cabin. Maybe the car had slipped over the edge, pitched down a precipice, and now lay, the boys trapped inside, at the bottom of the Klamath River. Maybe a great rock bounding down the mountainside had smashed the car. Maybe a landslide. I stopped myself sharply. I was doing the boys no good, or myself either. More probably they had stayed at Happy Camp to see a picture show, then decided it would be safer to drive back next morning. By this time the cold had reached my very bones. I lay down on the bunk, pulled the top blankets about me, and huddled into them. I fell asleep, but not for long. Soon Vicky came nuzzling under the blankets and whimpering in my ear, telling me she was cold and lonely. So was I. In desperation, I turned the blankets back until it came to white blanket sheets. I had minor compunctions about getting in between them, for I was fully dressed, even to my shoes. At this point, I realized that it was almost as bright as day in the cabin. Moonlight streamed across the floor, the whitest, brightest moonlight I had ever seen. Going to the window, I looked across the tossing river to the mountain that rose sharply from the other bank. Every trace of clouds had gone. In the short time I had been asleep, the forest had been completely changed by the snow. The close-set trees had become tall, pointed white tents outlined along the mountain top against an indigo sky. My word, it was cold. I took a newspaper off the shelf, wrapped it around my shoes, squirmed between the white blanket sheets, and pulled the covers over my head. Before I had time to draw a breath of satisfaction, Vicky scrambled over the foot of the bunk. A moment later, she had her head tucked into the hollow of my back. Happy dreams, I said to Vicky, and was out of this world. It may have been a passing car returning from an all-night dance at Happy Camp, or it may have been my own conscience that woke me. I scrambled out of my warm nest, and Vicky and I hit the floor together. The sun shone. Dear Sir's clock told me it was 15 minutes before 8. Did I hear the rattle of Up's old jalopy? Good heavens! I didn't want the boys to know I had been so frightened that I had spent the night at their cabin. Hurriedly, I arranged the tumbled blankets on Dear Sir's bed. There was the big iron spoon on the table, sticky with beans. I stumbled over Vicky, dashed to the sink with it. One swipe with the dish rag, and another dash back to the stove. Thank heaven I had remembered to put the giant spoon back in its place, where it would tell no tales. The rattling car passed on down the road. More than one good citizen drove a jalopy in this far country, but I was taking no chances. I pulled on my heavy coat, caught up my little canvas bag, never mind about vegetables now, and, with Vicky in front of me, hurried up to the road. There was no snow under the trees, and in the road it had been churned into muddy slush by the passing car. Now, if I could keep up this pace, I would be around the first curve before the boys hove in sight. I was wheezing by this time, and fearful of meeting some traveler who'd lift an eyebrow at meeting a woman coming away from the boys' cabin at this hour of the morning. That thought started me on the run until I reached the bars at the bottom of the steep trail that led to my cabin. I'd made it. The boys' reputations were saved. I made a fire in the kitchen stove, and soon the cabin was warm and cheerful, filled with the smell of coffee, frying bacon, and toast. I fed Vicky, and she lay at my feet, thumping her beautiful tail on the floor in appreciation. I straightened up the cabin and waited impatiently for the boys to show up with the makings of my Christmas pie. Cars passed now and then on the road below my cabin, so I was no longer worried. If misfortune had befallen Dear Sir and Up, I would have heard about it by now. But I was lonely without them. The boys had come to mean a great deal to me. They gave me comradeship, the kind that keeps a woman like me from slipping into the limbo of old age. It wasn't long until I heard Dear Sir and Up climbing my trail. Vicky ran to the door. I hailed them over Vicky's joyful barking. Good morning, I called, determined not to say anything that would reveal the fact that I knew they had not come home last night. Good morning, Dear Sir said stiffly. He set the box he was carrying on the table, turned, went out the door and up the trail that led to the diggings. Up started to follow, but I held him back by one arm. Wait a minute, I said. Why does Dear Sir act so glum? He shuffled his feet, and looked up the path after the rapidly disappearing Dear Sir. Tell me, I insisted. Well, damn it, he began. Why did you stay there all night anyway? Me? Stay where all night? Yes, you. Don't deny it. He bent over the box of groceries and pulled out what was undeniably my handkerchief. Dear Sir found this on the floor by his bed. And how about the kindling and wood? Dear Sir's Siskiyou news he was saving, all stuffed into the firebox. Up and Up would have been glaring if he could have managed it with his big blue eyes. And we'd like to know why you didn't touch it off instead of crawling into Dear Sir's bed to keep warm. I couldn't find a match, I stammered. You couldn't have used your eyes, dear madam. They were on the plate right over the stove, a whole box of them. I began to feel annoyed. You're trying to fool me, I said. There was no plate anywhere about the stove. I looked over every inch of space around there. You know, dear madam, I think you're trying to fool me. No cabin can be built without a plate. The ends of all the rafters rest on it. Just put that in your notebook. Oh, you mean the square piece of timber? I mean the plate. Oh, all right, the plate then. I didn't look there. Now you tell me what's the matter with dear sir. He couldn't really be miffed because I stayed all night in your cabin. Dear madam, the truth is, he is more than miffed. He's plain hot under the collar, but not at your staying in the cabin. It's because you messed around with the tool house. This morning when he went out there to get his Hungarian nails, he couldn't find hide nor hair of them, nor a lot of other things either. He has to give Hungarian nails in this kind of weather. You can't climb trails like we got this morning without nails in the soles of your boots. And damn it all, he couldn't find a nail of any kind, let alone the Hungarian, and they're the ones that work the best. You'd swept that workbench clean, so help me God. He shook my hand from his arm and bolted through the doorway. Once in the clear, he called back to me, You'll find the makings for the mince pie in the box, and he was off on his long-legged stride up the mountain. That was a busy day for me, and I didn't have time to worry over dear sir's attitude toward my well-intentioned activities at Bent Pine. I'd tell him that I'd taken good care of his Hungarian nails. He'd find every one in the keg, and all would be well between us again. He flared up easily, but he never stayed angry very long. Going through the box of groceries, I found everything I had asked the boys to get for the mince pie, even suet, except meat. No pie, I thought dismally. Then I remembered the venison jerky Nora and I had made months ago. Well, why not use that? I pounded some of it into a coarse sort of pemmican and put it into soak. I chopped citron and suet, cut apples in tiny pieces, measured spices, seeded raisins. By afternoon, the mincemeat was made, spooned into a jar, and set on the shelf to ripen until Christmas Day. I made a big pot full of coffee, hoping the boys would stop in on their way home from the diggings. They did. I felt I had to make things right with dear sir, and started by pouring him a cup of steaming coffee. I'm sorry about the tool house and the nails, I stammered. I've always heard that a woman's work is in her home, dear sir interrupted my halting apology with so much asperity that all my repentance and humility flew out the door. I could have turned him over my knee and spanked him, if, of course, he had been 30 years younger. You needn't take that tone with me, I began hotly. Ha! Up and Up said, and ducked out the door, leaving his coffee to get cold. If dear sir and I were going to quarrel, he definitely wasn't having any. Dear sir sampled his coffee, set the cup down. If you don't mind, dear madam, he said, please tell me where you hid my 6 boxes of Hungarian nails. Why, they're in the nail keg, of course. And I didn't hide them, I just put them there where they belonged. If you'd used the sense God gave you and lifted the blanket I threw over the keg so I could sit down. He said. So that's why I couldn't even find the keg. I saw the twinkle in his nice gray eyes. In spite of his occasional crustiness and snapping turtle sort of remarks, I defy any woman to hang on to her wrath in the face of that friendly twinkle. I knew the subject was buried forever and that we were friends again, but I learned a lesson, very valuable at my time in life. Never disturb a bachelor's bed, never touch even one of his old newspapers, and never, never clean up his tool house. Up and Up says he's going to spend Christmas with Nora and the baby in Wairika, dear sir said. I nodded. Of course, we might have known he'd want to do that. Then there'll just be you and me for Christmas dinner. Well, dear madam, if you don't mind, I'd like to ask a man I know in Happy Camp. Of course I don't mind. Who is he? Kirk Hubert is his name. He's the construction boss on the motel some company is building just the other side of Happy Camp. He has a wife and two children. They live in San Diego, and he's stuck up here on this job. Can't get home for the holidays. He seemed pretty unhappy about it, so I thought, by all means, go ahead and ask him. To tell you the truth, I already have. He grinned. I was sure it would be all right with you. Why don't you ask Frenchie too? I said on a sudden impulse. All right, I will. But won't you be too crowded, dear madam? Sure, we all will, I said recklessly. But who cares about a little thing like that on Christmas Day? Not you, anyway. The day before Christmas, I'll take Up and Up to Happy Camp, and he can get a bus from there to Wairika. I'll bring back the turkey and the rest of the fixins. Kirk will drive down Christmas morning. Dear Sir finished his coffee and said goodbye. I stood at the kitchen window, watching him go down the trail to the bars, then turn up the road toward Bent Pine. Not until then did I begin to think how I would seat 4 people at my small kitchen table, especially when I had only 3 chairs. And how would I stretch my few dishes so there would be enough to go around? The thought of the man from San Diego began to trouble me, too. What would he think of my cabin, of a Christmas dinner served on thick, common dishes, some of them chipped? Well, I should have thought of that sooner. Then it was the day before Christmas. I had no time to think of all the other days before Christmas that had, happily, sorrowfully, or just drudgingly gone over my head. The making of the crust for the mince pie, the scramble in the cellar for the old cracked cups, saucers, plates, to fill out the collection of antiques in my cupboard. As for the extra seat, I knew dear Sir could manage on an upturned orange crate. But this Kirk Hubert, this city man, I felt a little shy of him. There had been many years when I was unexcited by city men, they being the only kind I knew. I hoped he would not come all togged out in an elegant custom-made suit and put Frenchie to shame. That evening, and Christmas Eve it was, dear Sir stomped into my kitchen carrying a huge carton. Here's the bird, he announced cheerfully, all plucked and drawn, ready for the oven. He set the box down. Where'll I hang it, dear madam? Not in the cellar. Too many civet cats around. The woodshed's no good. Nighthawk might get in and have a meal of it. We'll have to hang it in your bedroom. I see no other place. By this time he had pulled the turkey out of the box. It was quite a sight, big, white, its neck neatly wrapped in paper. He held it up by its long legs and went to the other room. I followed and watched him hang the enormous bird directly over my bed, using the pulley and wire that had held my bedding aloft that first night I returned to the cabin. Where is it? Where is it? Where you go? Yeah. There goes the drawing. Yeah. Okay. The night I returned to the cabin after a long absence. Dear Sir was so pleased with his solution of the problem that I didn't protest. After all, what else is there to do? I knew I was in for a night with a gleaming white carcass gamboling and gobbling through my dreams. His work done and completely to his satisfaction, I might add, dear Sir went back to Bent Pine. I had one more chore to attend to before I could crawl into bed. I had to unpack the groceries still in the big box that had also held the turkey and get it out of the kitchen so I wouldn't have to face that job in the morning when there'd be so much else to do. I found everything I had ordered and put the bottles and packages on the shelf. Then I discovered there was another layer of something in the box, neatly covered with white tissue paper. What was this? I thought, feeling a flutter of excitement, and pulled the paper away. There lay 3 boxes, very festive looking in gay wrappings and bows of red ribbon. I opened them in a childish daze of suspense and surprise. There was a little card in each one from Dear Sir, written on it in the impersonal handwriting of some clerk. In one there was a pair of lovely furry bedroom slippers. He knew my old ones were worn to a frazzle. In another, good-looking stationery with the initial P engraved on it, and the last box held my favorite candy, chocolate-covered cherries. I was about to carry the carton outside when I saw another package, so bulky that it covered the bottom of the box. This was not done up in city style as Dear Sir's boxes had been, but was crookedly wrapped in a copy of the Siskiyou News and tied with 2 kinds of string. There was no card to identify the sender. Wonderingly, I lifted it out, tore off the newspaper. Out tumbled the cougar skin, thick, soft, pliable, backed with heavy green felt. It had been sent to San Francisco for that last professional touch, which Up and Up could not give it. So that was why he hadn't given it to me before. Those two wonderful boys. I wiped my eyes, blew my nose, and crept into bed.